Meeting to order. This is being recorded on Acton Public TV. At this time, as anybody is recording this, please let the chair know. Hearing none. In public participation, is there anybody from the public that would like to participate or have any comments? If not, we'll move to our first meeting agenda, which is the Acton Police Department Green Fleet Initiative.
Good evening. So I was asked to come tonight to talk about our Green Fleet Initiative. So we figured we'd start with our first electric acquisition, which was a donation of an electric motorcycle by Bursaw Gas. That motorcycle is not going to be used out on patrol. It's going to be used primarily on the rail trails, special events, if we have an officer that wants to go into the neighborhoods and do some community policing, but it's not going to be responding to calls for service like our regular police cruisers do. Our second venture is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, a Ford Fusion. We picked up this summer. The inspectional services got one, and then we picked one up as well. So we're evaluating that right now. If I could ask Deputy Chief Cogan to come up and just give you a brief overview of what our experience has been so far with that plug-in electric hybrid. Deputy Chief Cogan's been driving it.
Thank you. I'm lucky to have a car that the town provides for me to drive, first of all. And it's a little bit tighter than the cruisers or the SUVs that the other officers drive, so it encourages me to keep my weight down. And as I drove up here tonight, I looked at the fuel mileage, and I'm averaging about 308 miles per gallon. So it'll run about 30 miles on electric before it converts over to gasoline. And the amount of driving that I do typically in a week, I'm able to plug in at a station we've put into the station at the police station. When I get to work, I plug it in. And when I go about my day, I usually do it on electric and not consuming fuel. So far so good, just about 1,500 miles on it, and as I said, over 300 miles per gallon of fuel. So
How many miles per gallon again for the town manager?
over 300.
Nice job. Miles per gallon. So we're going to evaluate that vehicle and see if we can use that in other areas of the department. It's obviously not going to be used for patrol. So on the patrol side, timing is everything. The Board of Selectmen just came out with that sustainability policy. And Ford Motor Company just came out with an option for police cruisers, which is a hybrid. So that is Ford's calculations on what they expect the average police department to save going to a hybrid police cruiser as opposed to the standard gas police cruiser. Our 13 marked police cruisers that are on the front line average about 18,000 miles per year. So some of the cars might see savings similar to that, 20,000 miles. But at 18,000 miles per gallon, to get an idea of the fleet usage, if while the vehicles are driving, the 24 miles per gallon average versus the 17, it's going to be about 308 gallons per car, times 13 cars is over 4,000 gallons. The other piece is the idling, which a lot of people don't think about when you're typically talking about a car. These vehicles are used by the patrol officers, and they're out on the street typically in a patrol area waiting for a call or monitoring traffic or whatever they might be doing, actually doing reports in the cars as well, running radar. So there's a lot of idling time that goes on. These vehicles are the officers, they're their office space. That's where they operate for most of the day. They're not at the station. Detectives have some office, a desk, a computer. The patrol officers share several laptops just outside of the report room. So I don't I haven't vetted these numbers yet, but Ford believes, they think the average is about 4.9 hours per shift that these cars are idling. So that's where we're gonna save the most money. If we convert, actually, we don't convert the miles. If we stay with their 4.9 estimate, they estimate 933 gallons per car per year saved going to the hybrid option. So our 13 marked cars that come out to about 12,000 gallons we wouldn't use in a year if the entire frontline marked fleet was over to hybrid. And then our unmarked cruisers average about 8,000 miles a year. We won't see the same savings in the idling, but we'll see some savings in driving, about 137 gallons per car. So if we do the entire fleet over to hybrid, the 13 marked and the 10 unmarked, we'd be looking at close to $35,000 per year at the $2 per gallon mark. I talked to Corey York. The past several months, we've been paying $2 a gallon. But if we go back to FY15, we were paying $3. FY09, we were paying $3.50. So that $2 per gallon today would be $35,000 a year, but that could go up as gas prices go up. So that's pretty exciting. We have our first 2 hybrid cruisers expected to be delivered later this month, early October. We typically try to do 5 cars per year, so we'd be looking at potentially having our frontline 12 of the 13 cars over to hybrid in FY22. And then taking some of the frontline cars, converting them over to unmarks, we'd have the entire fleet over in FY25. This is a great opportunity for police departments because typically the hybrids are becoming more popular, but you typically don't have a purpose-built, heavy-duty vehicle that's a hybrid for police environments. Yes?
Is the acquisition cost the same, hybrid versus non?
I'm sorry, I left that out. The up cost for the hybrid is approximately $3,200 this year. So on a marked cruiser, about $2,400 per car savings per year. And that's the average, so some of the cars might go up a little higher. These first 2 hybrids we're gonna put them in the highest mileage slots and see how we get the savings. So we'd be enjoying the savings, the break-even point in year 2. Some of these cars will be in the fleet for 5 or 6 years, 4 or 5, depending on the miles and depending how they handle the driving.
Any other comments from the Finance Committee? Jason?
Yeah, just to reiterate, you say you try and do 5 cars a year. If you've got 13 frontline cars, we're getting, the frontline fleet is completely new after 3 years. It's never more, the 3rd year is the eldest we'll ever see a car out on patrol?
At 5 a year, yes. So some of the higher miles cars, after 2 years, they might have 50 or 60,000 miles on them.
Okay.
Some of the other cars with lower, we'll keep those for the extra year, so depending on how the usage goes. When we just did a shift bid that started last Sunday night, and depending on how the officers bid their shifts, we assign officers per car. So we try to have 2 officers per car, so the car's not driving 365, 24 hours a day. Depending on who's driving them, they have different mileages, so it changes over time.
Okay.
Mike?
Yeah, I know when you quote the mileage of a police car, I'm sure that's the true mileage. Are those cars ever turned off?
They do. But when they're actually, when officers are out driving today, they could be idling and driving or sitting at calls for several hours during the shift.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still like wear and tear on the engine, even if you're just sitting there. But my Mini Cooper, for example, when you pull up to a light, the engine electronically shuts off. As soon as you take your foot off the brake, it comes back on instantly. So I'm sure there's savings for petroleum or for gas will be quite significant. Now, does the town buy their fuel in bulk? Like, where do you gas up?
Yes, that's why I check at the town highway garage, and Corey York, I believe, does all the ordering for the fuel for all the different departments.
That makes sense. So they probably get a bulk rate even on the gasoline.
Correct.
That's good.
And when these officers are idling in the car, once the battery's fully charged, the engine's going to shut off and the battery's going to run all the electronics.
Oh, good.
We have a lot more electronics in the cars between radios and all the different equipment we have in there, scanners.
Steve?
Yeah, Chief, so is the battery warranted for at least 36 months?
I have to check on that. I believe so.
And I think your mileage is a little low. I've got a Fusion hybrid. I get 41 miles a gallon.
They have the plug-in, so, Christine?
What do we do now with cars when we're end-of-lifing them?
So depends on what condition it's in. Over the past couple of years, we've repurposed older cruisers. If I jump back to 2010, 2011, we had a lot of V8 Crown Victorias, and once we were done with them, we weren't going to send them anywhere else in town because they weren't fuel efficient.
Okay.
So now that we're in these hybrids, and the standard cars we have now are 6 cylinders. So they average about 17 miles per gallon. So some of these vehicles can be moved over to municipal properties, can be used in IT, some of these other departments.
Okay, so you expect that to be the same after we transfer over to hybrids?
Absolutely.
Good, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. What I would like to see is later on is an update to the committee with how they're actually performing in the field.
Certainly.
And to get some hard data on it that, yeah, we're saving, we're getting, Ford says we're gonna get 24, or we're getting 25, or we're getting 22, or whatever, and there's how much we've saved over the lifetime. So I think that'd be good data to see going forward to know how this is actually panning out.
Absolutely.
Are they all-wheel drive?
They are.
We live in New England. We do have snow.
No heated seats.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I appreciate the information. Yeah. Oops, sorry. That brings us to our next one, which is the Regional School District building. Go ahead, and Superintendent Light is going to update the committee.
First, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm also here with Mary Brolin from the School Building Committee. And then John Peterson is also here from the School Committee, and I see Diane Baum in the audience as well. So just thank you for having us. The purpose of my presentation tonight is to give you a baseline of information about the status of the school building project. I'm going to split that into 2 parts. First, I'd like to talk a little bit just to provide you with an update around the design of the building and where we are with that, but then spend some time on the finances. I had a sneaking suspicion that that would be of interest to you tonight specifically. So, what you're looking at on the map here is the Douglas and Gates site. Through the process of the feasibility study that we began really last year, we have been studying 14 different options. Actually, there's 15 because there's a 14A that got thrown in partway through. Everything from renovating Douglas, which proved not to be feasible, through building this idea of a twin school. And I'll talk about the value of building a twin school later in the design. But ultimately, the school building committee voted to go with a single phase construction of a twin elementary school to include the Douglas and Gates schools. And in addition, we're adding 9 preschool classrooms to that. So what you're looking at on the map here is the Douglas site to the north side of the map and the Gates site to the south. This parking lot here that I'm circling is the current Douglas building, and down on the south side, that parking lot next to the new building is the current Gates building, and then next to it on the softball field would be the location of the new school. The overall layout of the building is in 3 separate floors. The first floor are shared common spaces. So when you enter the building, similar to the Parker Damon building, which I know many of you may be familiar with, there's a main entry on the corner here, and there are administrations for both of the elementary schools as you enter. There's a shared common area here, along with cafeteria space, gymnasium space, some ensemble rehearsal space, multi-purpose rooms. We also have 2 STEAM labs, knowing the importance of science, technology, engineering education, even at the elementary level. The state just began funding STEAM labs, so we're the first project to be able to take advantage of that. And then on the north side of the building here, we have the preschool classrooms. The preschool does have its own separate entrance because we know that that's very important to have a separate drop-off for preschool students so that we're not too congested at the elementary side entrance. Moving up to the second floor of the building, this is going to be the Gates Elementary School, and the second and third floors are identical in design because we wanted to make sure that there were equitable facilities between the 2 schools. The way this is structured is overall, we have some kindergarten classrooms over here, which are slightly larger due to space requirements and restrooms built in. We have first and second grade down this corridor, along with third and fourth grade. These are art and music rooms, counseling, psychology, some special education space here. And then we also have 5th and 6th grade classrooms. And that is the floor. This is a departure from the design of the Parker Damon building. And if you're familiar with that building, it's essentially a left and right setup. So students at either school, it's still a 3-story school, but the McCarthy Town School is 3 stories on the left and the Miriam School is 3 stories on the right, and students travel up and down. When we talked to the principals about the design of this building, there was a real desire on the part of the school community to keep a single-story feel to the buildings so that once students entered their school level, it was really still a school. And so we opted to go with the floor-by-floor design. And that was something that was very positively received at the state when we went with that option. Did you want to take questions in the middle, or?
Take questions at the end.
Want me to go through the architecture side and then we can pause for questions maybe?
Yeah, that'd be a good idea, because
Okay.
I already have a few questions on this, but.
Sure. So the third floor, I talked about the second and third floors being identical. This center area here in the middle is a 2-story library media center. On the second floor is the main section of the library media center. However, it's extended onto the third floor to make sure that both schools have access to that from their respective school floors. This is just a view inside of a standard classroom. You can see the area, kind of the green space as you enter is an entryway. We wanted to have cubbies inside the classroom as opposed to halls because it can present some safety issues for students if they ever needed to evacuate. So there's cubbies, there's also some sinks located in this area as students enter because that's a requirement in elementary school classrooms. And then beyond is the main classroom. This is the same square footage that MSBA allots for a standard classroom. This is just a back view of that same space. And then a couple of exterior renderings. The architects spent quite a bit of time in the West Acton area taking photographs of different architectural sites within the town and wanted to capture some of the elements of West Acton. They couldn't replicate, with such a large building, they couldn't replicate a lot of the identical architecture, but what they opted to do was go with kind of a mill building type of feel and then try to make that very kid-friendly in the approach. If you remember, as I talked about, this area here where the kind of third and fourth grade wings, this is the preschool and kindergarten area back here. And then you have your music and art classrooms along, and then the gymnasium here and the 5th and 6th grade classrooms in the back. So I'm welcome, pause there and see if you have any just kind of design questions.
I just had a question, please, back on slide 4, and I apologize, I just can't read the print, but
Yeah.
what are the 3 big white blocks, which obviously are nothing for the second and third floor, but there was something there on the first floor?
So that's a great question. I'll go back. This is actually the first floor in slide 3. These 2 white blocks, I think, are where your question is. These are our gymnasiums. So the MSBA actually opted to reimburse us for 2 gymnasium spaces instead of 1, which was fantastic. This one over here is the equivalent of a full-size middle school competition basketball court. And I will say that the standard is a middle school basketball competition court because they know in elementary schools it's often used for community education. And generally the older people who use for community ed don't like to play on a high school court because it's too tiring. So we just purposely design a middle school court, everyone feels good. And then we also over here have a smaller wellness studio that's about 3,000 square feet. That's like a second gymnasium for us. This is important in this project because we have preschool age students through grade 6. So we actually have really 7 years of, and sometimes 8 years of students in one building. So what we're anticipating is the smaller kiddos will use this smaller gym a lot, and that will free up the space here. And we can also subsequently, this will have a divider that can raise and lower. So we really can run 3 separate classes at the same time. And that is all reimbursable square footage by the state. The second and third floor are just, it's like a 1.5-story gymnasium, and then you're just seeing the roof. Yes, the other white block, that's the roof of the CAF up on the north side. And there's the CAF.
Is the CAF going to be any different than it is at Parker Damon?
The cafeteria is different than at Parker Damon. The cafeteria in this building is dividable, so there's a dividing wall that can retract right down the middle of it. What we found at Parker Damon is the lunches are very, very loud, and that's a challenge for large populations of our students to be in that size cafeteria. We wanted to bring the small school feel back to that. So it's a double-sized CAF because of the student population, but each of these sides are roughly equivalent to what we have now for cafeterias. We also are building 2 stages into this. One is really more of a performance stage. The other stage, what we actually did is reduce the square footage of our cafeteria, but make it more of a platform that at times can have seating on it, but can also be used as kind of a second presentation area for the other school, because we know 2 schools tend to vie for stage time. But this area is also fully reimbursable. We did reduce the overall square footage to get there.
Do the design elements incorporate concepts like keeping the general public separate from the educational areas of the building? For example, you need to know who's coming into that building and limit the number of access points and so on.
Yeah, what we're foreseeing is this actually leads to the kind of the walkway over the wetlands through this area. We will probably open up these doors only in the mornings and in the afternoons for arrival and dismissal for students who are walking, because through the process, all of our Douglas families promised us that they would all walk to school and not take buses or drive. And that was kind of the deal we reached. This is the main entrance of the school. It's actually designed as a vestibule, so when people come in, they can get into the first vestibule, but then there's a second set of locked doors. Parents actually have to go in, and visitors have to go in through the office, check in the office, and then they're allowed into the school. Similarly, the preschool has something like that. There are lockable doors throughout the building. I'm not going to go into detail, but yes, absolutely, there's access control throughout. The overall idea here is that the first floor is kind of the public facing side of the building. The preschool can be locked off, and then people actually get brought up to the second and third floors.
Peter, will there be, so the vestibule area where you enter, they have to go through the office. What if there's an event going on at the school on the weekend or at night or something? I'm sure you're not going to leave the offices open for everybody to go through the office to get into the event.
There are different, with electronic access control, you can program doors for all sorts of events. There are lockable doors throughout the building, so if there's an event in the gymnasiums on a weekend, we can actually open these doors and people have access to the gymnasium and kind of more of this community side of the building for events. But yeah, keep the academic and main areas locked off.
Can you point out the security doors? Point out exactly where these security doors are.
I actually don't present publicly on security, but there are security doors throughout the building.
Al?
Yeah, hi. First off, this is a beautiful design. I'm interested to know, I'm sure it's up to code, or will be up to code for fire safety, but what's the egress like, especially from the 3rd floor, where if you go back to the exterior picture,
Sure. Actually, it might be
real
easier
concern,
to start
especially
here
for-
and talk about stairwells.
Yeah.
There are actually 4 sets of stairs built into this building. There's a set of stairs, I'll start here on the east side. That's a 3-story set of stairs right here. There's another main stairwell, actually, that extends kind of in a circular fashion around the library media center all the way up to the 3rd floor. And this is essentially more than a double-wide stairwell. And then there's also another set of stairs here for more access and egress. And then there's a 4th stairwell all the way up on the north side. So regardless of where students are in the building, there's plenty. I believe, according to code, we actually only needed the main staircase and 2 egresses in addition, but we built in 1 more, just to make sure we were covered.
And I'm sure the adjacent classrooms, one can access to each one from each other. So in the event, no one's getting trapped in these rooms.
So actually, the new thinking around that is you actually don't want a lot of easy access between classrooms because you want doors to be able to lock between, because we have to think about intrusive threats as well as fire threats and evacuations. Right. So it's a little more complicated. One thing that this building does do, and it's very, very hard to see on this, but in between each classroom, there's actually a shared breakout space. We know that our students often are working in small groups, sometimes with other adults, and we wanted to have a breakout space that the teachers in the room could actually see into and supervise.
What is the capacity of the school?
The school,
Design
the design enrollment that we have with MSBA, and this is getting into some of the other slides, but it's 990 students. However, the preschools in addition to that, so I believe it was 1,150. Yeah, it was 1,150, I think was the ending. But the design enrollment from MSBA purposes is 990 because they don't technically count the preschool students until October 30th when they choose to reimburse.
Sahana?
So my quick question, all of this is reimbursable, or is there any part of the square footage that's non-reimbursable, and can you point it out?
I'm going to talk about that in the next section.
Okay.
It's a great transition, though. So I want to talk about the value that this project has, and I use the word save here, and I was thinking about that coming over, and it's really not about saving money, because saving money increases your bank account, but what's the type of value that this brings? Originally, the biggest decision that the community made in moving this project forward that brings value to our district is the idea to consolidate 3 schools. We don't have an exact dollar amount, and it's really, we're not able to calculate it, but what we do know from the feasibility study was the replacement of the Douglas School only was estimated to be $99 million. So with an overall project budget of $117.5 million, there's a significant cost savings just for that decision alone, but it's not even just the Douglas and Gate schools because we're also putting a preschool into that. So when you start adding those types of numbers up, especially with the value of money over time, there's a significant savings just in doing that. The second piece I want to point out in terms of value to the taxpayers was a decision the building committee made to go with a single phase construction versus doing the same project in multiple phases and adding an additional 15 months. That decision alone saved another $7 million on the project. The third was through the value engineering process, where we got the initial cost estimates back and were able to reduce the overall cost of the budget by another $3.5 million through a series of decisions, which I'll highlight in a couple of slides. I will be upfront, there are additional costs to operating this idea of a twin school, and that was very, very important to our community to maintain small school sizes that have individual identities. That's really the history of the Acton schools. But we did need additional MSBA space for our offices and administrative spaces. It's kind of just a cost of doing business. It cost us $1.8 million in space to be able to do that. That's the best estimate we have. It's about 3,000 square feet over the MSBA guidelines. MSBA will only reimburse us for the equivalent of 1 school administrative space. They don't build twin schools, is kind of how they put it to us, that if we want to build a twin school as a community, that's a community decision, but they won't reimburse 2 of everything for us. What we did do that's, I think, important to note is the square footage of each school's administrative space is less than the allotted space that MSBA would have given us for one of those schools. So our schools, we've reduced the square footage of each school administration below what MSBA guidelines are, but yet we need 2 school administrations plus a preschool admin, so it does come to about 3,000 extra square feet. Kind of high level ways and the big numbers of cost savings. The original project budget estimate was about $124.5 million. That came in on or about August 6th. We spent about a month through the value engineering process where we saved about $3.5 million in costs. We also reduced 2 of our contingencies based on historical data from other existing building projects around the state from about 4% to 2.5%, and then another owner's contingency from 1.5 to 1%. We also renegotiated some of our fees with our consultants and actually are in the process of doing that again. And we were able to save almost another $1 million just in renegotiated fees. So the final voted project budget that the building committee authorized not to exceed was $117.8 million. And you can kind of see the details on that. Still to be determined that we have not finalized. John Mangiaratti and I are having some discussions around what the costs are in terms of permitting fees to the town of Acton. If you're aware, the bylaws are, I believe, 1.5% of total project costs. On a building like this, that's a really big number. We're in the process of determining what those fees need to be, but those are not included in this budget because we have not reached a determination on that. I just want to point you to this. I'm going to ask you some questions on this slide if it's okay. This is actually just a picture, so you get a sense of the list of items value engineered from the building. There were 43 individual items that the building committee considered and actually adopted as value engineering items. Some tough decisions along the way, but I think overall we're going to have a great space for kids and do this at a cost that is as reasonable as we can for the town. I'll give you a high-level overview of some of the value engineering items. One item, this was multiple items in there, but we reduced the scope of some of our landscaping to the tune of about $600,000. We reduced our cafeteria size and made the second stage fully reimbursable from the state, and that saved about $380,000. We had the architects had designed terrazzo flooring at the entrance, where we were very happy with linoleum flooring that requires less maintenance over time. That was $340,000. We had hoped to get a green roof in the project. We pulled that out. We're going to have the roof over the cafeteria be green roof ready so that at some point in the future we might come back and try and raise money in the community to put a green roof on it. But that's another $340,000. We had a very explicit discussion, and I'll go into more detail about this in a minute, but around kind of net zero goals for the building, and we went with the hybrid option for our geothermal system with some electric boilers. That saved us $300,000. We also looked at other things like changing the exterior block that was a very highly specialized block to a standard brick. We had tried to put some radiant and flooring in the preschool classrooms. It really wasn't worth the amount of money that it was going to cost us. They'll still have heat. It will be the same heat that every other room gets in the building. In the restrooms, rather than putting ceramic tile on the walls, we actually decided to go with a fiberglass reinforced panel, which is kind of a single sheet. Actually, our director of operations prefers that, especially with the little kiddos, because the grout in tile can absorb things that we don't want to absorb in bathrooms. We ended up reducing the exterior glass by about 5% on the building. We pulled that from areas that really will not be visible to the community, but 5% savings. It ends up also saving us on energy efficiency as well. So that was a good decision. And then just some miscellaneous items that really came to another $600,000. So that's really where that $3.5 million in value engineering added up. This line item, and I shared this with Roland electronically, but it was earlier today, so he may, I'm sure he didn't get a chance to pass it along, but he has a digital copy of the overall project budget for this. This is just a high-level picture of some of the numbers. The total gross, so the design enrollment was 990, which I shared earlier. Total gross square footage, this is about 175,000 square foot building. That is a large, large building. Total cost for excluding our contingencies was 114, but then we always know there's a series of design contingencies built in to that. Our MSBA reimbursement rate, last year at this time, it was 45%. MSBA added several percentage points. We got an additional 1.75 percentage points for the condition of our facilities and district capital planning, which is great news. And then we also got 2 percentage points for our green energy initiatives. So that was also very positive news. So right now, our MSBA reimbursement rate for eligible costs, that's the caveat, is 49.7%. That is the official reimbursement rate of the district. You hear lots of numbers thrown around, but those are all manufactured numbers. The actual rate that MSBA talks about is 49.7, so I'll keep referring to that. And then the total facilities grant from MSBA is 39.6, roughly, for that total project budget of 117.8. Just to break that down in a little bit more visible of a format, the total project budget, including our contingencies, is 117.8. We've already paid 1.3 million of that. That's the cost of the feasibility study. However, MSBA makes you include it in the budget just to make sure the community knows it's there. 116.5 is what's remaining on that. Of that, the total grant, the maximum facilities grant, because MSBA can always, through the auditing process, choose to bring that down. If they find something in your project that they didn't authorize, they can reduce the grant as the building is constructed. But the maximum grant is 39.6 million, and the share to the school districts is 76.8 million. What is reimbursable and what's not reimbursable? A high-level picture of this. 98% of all of our planned spaces in the building are estimated to be reimbursable. That's 171,000 square feet of this building. Site costs up to 8% of the total project budget. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment up to $1,200 a student for 990 students. And I'll talk about that in a second, why I'm pausing. The technology budget per student is $1,200 that MSBA reimburses, and again, that's for 990 students. What's not reimbursable at a high level? The total cost of construction per square foot is capped at $333. Keep that in mind, that's an important number. Space allocation beyond MSBA guidelines, which we have about 3,000 square feet, is not reimbursable. Site costs exceeding 8% of the total project budget are not reimbursable. Some construction contingencies, insurance, bonds, MSBA likes to pay for the building. They don't like paying for the other stuff. Asbestos abatement is not reimbursable. And then the FF&E and technology budgets above $1,200 per student is not. That's important because there's not a school being built right now that can budget $1,200 and actually purchase the furniture and equipment that they need and the technology. We looked at a variety of budgets around the state. The budgets are going up to as much as $1,800 per student. Building committee didn't feel comfortable going that high, so they settled kind of in that middle range of $1,500 per student. And then additionally, though, we have about the 125, 150 preschool students going into this building beyond the 990. So we had to budget some money for furniture, technology, and equipment for that population as well. But that's not included in MSBA's reimbursable amounts. When you look at all of that in the big dollar figures, of the non-reimbursable costs that MSBA will not give us back, 29 million of that is coming just from the cap at $333 a square foot. So there's a delta there of about $212 a square foot of actual building construction costs. The building itself is costing probably about $505. When you add in site work and everything else, it's about $530, $540 per square foot. But that's the biggest number right there, is the MSBA's cap on square footage cost. Additionally, there's site work that does go beyond the 8% cap for about $3 million. As I mentioned before, we have the space for administration space at 1.8, and then there are some contingencies and bonds that MSBA doesn't reimburse. That's about 1.2. And then the smaller numbers are asbestos abatement, furniture, fixtures, and equipment, and then technology. And those, so the ineligible costs of the project are $36.5 million. So if you went back to this worksheet quickly, whoops, which I'm having trouble with, and you looked at that total project budget of 117, you would take that ineligible number off of it, and that's how MSBA gets to the reimbursable amount, and then they give us 49.7% of that.
The asbestos abatement, that's from the Douglas and Gates schools currently?
Correct, yep. A lot of tile from that era in the floors is asbestos. There can be asbestos in ceilings, boilers, things like that. Just to give you a sense of where building costs are coming in, this was an interesting graph on MSBA's website, and there's a link here. It just doesn't show up well in the presentation, but you can go to that, and this is actually a interactive thing where you can hover over any of these little dots, and this is, every dot here represents a building that has been constructed through MSBA's reimbursement process, dating all the way back to, I think it was 2004 or something like that, through present, 2004, 2005. Our building project started right here at this dot, and we're not approved, which is why we're in light blue. Through the value engineering process, we're now down in this range with this series of dots, which is kind of the median of all the current projects going on. This green line is the cap on MSBA's reimbursement. So you can see MSBA just has not kept up. If you ask people at MSBA, the reason that they can't keep up is because if they reimburse at this rate up here, that means they'll be able to fund fewer projects around the state for other communities. So it's kind of a catch-22. But we are really hampered by that to the tune of $29 million in gap of reimbursement. Spaces over MSBA guidelines, and Sahana, this goes to your question. The space is over 150 square feet of additional gym storage, which we just simply need, and then it's about 3,000 in administration space. We're waiting for a final determination, but we believe it will be reimbursable. We have math, reading, and English language learning rooms in the building, which we absolutely need. They are used every day in our schools. They have to be in a school that's a modern school. In order to get to as close to that total square footage, we actually reduced one of the classrooms. It was weird the way the enrollment projected with MSBA. It actually ended up being 37 classrooms we could have built, but 37 doesn't divide equally between two schools. What we really needed were 36 classrooms, and then we used some of those square footage to get to the other types of spaces that we needed. Cost of net zero, this is a little hard to see. Essentially, we had a long discussion about this at one of our recent building committee meetings, if this was a goal we wanted to continue to pursue. The total upfront capital costs to become a net zero building are really about $3.2 million on the energy side, about $400,000 on the water side, and the waste is actually built into construction at this point. Every construction company recycles their materials as the building's being demolished. The original plan that we looked at was for a fully geothermal system. We had a lot of discussion at the building committee about this, and some of the community members really just talked about that planning, a building not just for, 2022 when it opens, but 2062 and 2072 when this building is operating. We wanted to keep the energy at a high priority in the building, so they opted to go with the hybrid geothermal system. It saved about $300,000 on the cost of the full and brought it down a little, but this was just a decision the committee made. We did plug that into our debt strategy subcommittee's formula to find out what the impact to taxpayers would be for a net zero building, and it was between $16 and $24 a year was the additional cost to support that type of energy usage. Comparisons for the big total costs to what we had presented before. The total project cost we originally projected last year at 120 to 130 million. That's now down to 117.8. We know that after the 1.3 million of feasibility, it's actually about 116.5 left. The MSB reimbursement we thought would be between 40 and 60. It's 39.7, so we're just shy of our goal there. MSBA estimated reimbursement rate was between 35 and 45. We're at 34% reimbursement. I will say, before we value engineered 3 million of the project out, we were just north of 33%. It didn't move that dial a lot, and it's really, really hard to get that rate up. The AB total share is right in the middle of what we projected, And then to Acton, the total share was about 65 million, which was similar to what we had projected. Originally, we had thought that we would be asking taxpayers for between $650 and $850 per year on the average single-family tax bill. That number, because of favorable borrowing trends, we're actually able to lower now to between $450 and $600 per year. Project schedule, again, I know you're struggling to see details on the big screen, but we are going out talking to the community throughout the fall. We are coming to town meeting in December to ask for approval of the project. If that's approved, through the spring, we'll be finishing up final design of some of the interior spaces, and we would be planning to break ground in late June of this school year. There'd be 2 years of construction. We'd be open in the fall of 2022. Then we'd have 1 additional year to tear the Douglas and Gates schools down and then build the parking lots. So that's the rough timeline. I'm happy to answer any of the money side of the questions.
Christie.
Going back to the summary of project costs, you talk about the maximum total facilities grant, including contingencies, and when will that actually be finalized, what that number is?
That's a good point. That actually gets finalized at the October 30th meeting.
Okay, so before all this gets built.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, we're doing our best to estimate that based on our project manager's experience, but MSBA reviews every detail of this project and comes up with their own numbers that are reimbursable. They will then determine that final rate. I will also put the caveat, though, that they audit the project in phases as it's constructed, and if we're adding things to the project, they reserve the right to reduce that reimbursement. So just, it doesn't, the final word isn't until after it's built, but October 30th.
Okay. And on the geothermal system, what is the lifespan of that system?
The lifespan of the system is actually the life of the building. So we did a life cycle cost analysis of the geothermal versus a traditional ducted system, and they come out roughly the same, to be honest, over the lifespan, because the initial capital costs are higher on the geothermal, but there's no replacement costs that are needed on a geothermal, whereas there was an additional couple $100,000 in boilers for a traditional system.
So for the 50 years, we kind of theoretically expect the building to go, we're only going to have to replace the electric boilers, is the idea?
Correct. And in all honesty, the electric boilers are only there for those small handful of the coldest days of the year. We were able to reduce the number of geothermal wells from about 100 to 60 by adding those 2 boilers, which was a significant cost savings. And based on the energy consultants we have, those will really only kick on the coldest days of the year. So we also anticipate those to have a long life cycle.
Go ahead. Mike.
Yeah, I think one of the best decisions the building committee did was go through that value engineering exercise, and I think it really demonstrated that you could get significant monetary savings as well as time savings out of that project, and as a result, it made it much more feasible. One concern about the budget, however, is it seems like the number that's going to be stuck in people's head is the 17.8, but you're carrying 0 for permitting costs, and as you admitted, it will be a big number, and why are we still carrying 0?
Because we also have ample money in the contingencies right now to be able to cover that. There's owner's contingency, there's designer's contingency, and there's general construction contingency. And then we also opted for a CM at risk process, and they carry their own contingencies. So we have $5 to $6 million built in overall.
5 or 6 million, I think, well, for Minuteman, they had a budget like $1 million for permitting.
Sure.
So I think we need to know, especially with the town of Acton, I believe it's based on a fixed percentage of your construction costs, and so you can determine what that number is. I just think we need to make that number visible.
Yeah, and John and I are working on that already, and what we're actually doing, rather than just a percentage of the construction costs, we're trying to really look at what are the actual costs going to be to the town, with the goal that we don't charge the taxpayers twice for the same thing.
Okay.
Yes, Peter. Well, since John's back in the room, I would say, yeah, if you can work out a deal on the permitting, you might as well, because, you know, if you have to pay the 1.5%, then you're going to come back at ALG and get it out of the town somehow or another, so.
I don't know what you're talking about.
So, couple questions. You quoted, I think, $7 million in savings or opportunities cost avoided by going to a single phase construction. What's the nature of the savings? Is it just inflation, or is it?
There's construction inflation, and all of the numbers here, just so you know, the final project budget, knowing it's 3 years out, actually carries 3% a year in construction inflation built in to that number. So this is an inflated value intentionally, because we know we need it. The cost savings there, it's in saving a year of construction, which is a huge potential savings. It's also in the need to continually move teachers and students back and forth. There's some cost associated with that. But it's really about the time that you save, because time and money in construction are really the drivers.
Okay. I saw recently that the town of Gardner, which is building a twin school, just got an MSBA grant of $49 million on a $83 million total project, which is a much higher rate of reimbursement. And it's, I believe it's capacity of 950 students and a size of 147,000 square feet. So it's smaller.
Right.
And what I don't understand, and I'll be the first one to say I get lost in these reimbursements, what's eligible, what's not eligible, but conceptually, how do they get a 60% reimbursement rate and we get a 35% on basically a similar project?
Yeah, so every town's reimbursement rate is calculated separately, and I believe MSBA's total cap on reimbursement rates goes up to about 80%. And so communities like Lowell or some of the cities are effectively hitting that cap, but it's, the biggest driver is the ability that the MSBA uses, you know, of taxpayers to be able to fund a building in their town.
So I'd also assume that since theirs is an $83 million project, there isn't anything probably that's not reimbursable.
Well, you know, I
obviously
don't know.
You don't know the project details.
I'll go to this slide for a second because I did a little research, and this is the slide with all the different projects. And what I was curious about were what was going on with some of these projects down here. I actually had our project manager look at one of the projects here is a Springfield Elementary School, and that's another school that's coming in at that $80-ish million range. Every project has its unique elements. You know, we have wetlands that we have to make sure we're really planning carefully around. We're adding a preschool into the design of this that can also drive up some costs. One of the big cost savings for one of these buildings down in this low range is that they're actually taking all the students out of the existing elementary school first, redistributing those students around the district, to taking the school down, but the site is actually already buildable because it houses an elementary school and they don't have to do the type of site prep that we have to do. I was fortunate that I called our project manager because he actually had started as the project manager on that project, so he had a lot of knowledge of that. But every building tells its own story about specifically why the driver of that cost per square foot, but that's one example.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, one more. Since you brought up the site, what kind of conversations have we had with DEP over wetlands? And how do you do a net zero sewer system, by the way? Where's it go?
So if you do sewer, it won't be net zero because you're not keeping your waste on site.
There's a septic one there with a 130-year payback, which is a little long for my taste. But.
Yeah, I didn't really talk about that because I wanted to keep it moving. I'll answer the second part first. It's really a net zero water goal, not necessarily net zero waste from a human waste standpoint, but the water in this building, we're actually doing rainwater collection from the roof and then using that to flush the toilets. Repeat the other part of that, sorry.
I mean, I had a kid go to Douglas, I had a kid go to Gates. site is wet.
Yeah.
DEP usually takes a dim view of building on wet. So I'm just, have we had any discussions with them? Are they on board?
So, yeah, everything, we have landscape consultants that do all that work, and we're using niche engineering for that. And they actually just did a walk with our Conservation Commission the other day on the site. We didn't see any issues anticipated, but unfortunately the board couldn't meet that night. I think there was a quorum issue, so we're awaiting final word from our Conservation Commission, but we're confident in our buildable area on the site.
Thank you.
Look, Tom, and then Al.
Peter, I understand the building contains 3 distinct schools, and they want to maintain their distinct identities. But I'm looking at the administration cost, and we've got 3 separate administrations where the MSBA reimburses only a single one, and that really accounts for the bulk of that excess space exceeding the guideline is from the administration area. So I'm wondering, have we wrung out any efficiencies at all by combining the 3, and is there any way that they couldn't be further combined to free up some of that space?
So ultimately the answer is there were certainly efficiencies we looked at around the types of spaces. Like, we reduced the square footage of all the administrators' offices right off the top. So I think I'm just pulling this one number out, I think the principal's office is typically 450 square feet in an MSBA building. Ours is 300 square feet. And we did similar things to a lot of our spaces in the administration to make that reasonable. Ultimately, we got a lot of feedback from our community. We did some surveys of the community around the building, and that started prior to the feasibility study and has gone on since. But the overwhelming feedback from our parents in the community is that they want the identity of the elementary schools, because families in this community are passionate about associating themselves with that. But then 2, all of the research points to the optimum school size for elementary school students is about 450 students. And when you start to get too big, kids get lost in that. And that's really a priority of the district to keep that in the small school feel. So that was kind of the one area where there was just a cost of doing business to the district of trying to save by building one foundation, one roof, one calf, things like that.
Oh, sure, I get that. I'm just wondering about the 3 distinct administrative areas. Was there no way to combine that into a single?
No, if we did, we would still need 2 principals' office, 2 assistant principals. So the spaces we needed, we just split them into 2 so that they were school identified. Sure, that's a good question.
My questions are similar to Tom's. First off, I think it's a great presentation. Thank you very much for putting it all together. I think it's imperative that this pass in town, and I think it's imperative that it pass in Boxborough. And I'm concerned that there's going to be a struggle in both towns. I think there's a lot of fiscal hawks in both towns, probably more than most realize. To Tom's point about the administration area, I get the idea of wanting to have or needing to have separate principal office, separate areas that make a small school feel within a large school, and that makes perfect sense. It's mentioned here that what are the additional costs of a twin school? It's not really an additional cost. You have 2 schools. This is the area that we're not able to save in. Right. But if you drill into it, there's some areas that a fiscal hawk is going to look at this and say, why do we have 5 copy rooms when MSBA says for 1? If it's 2 schools, why are there not 2? Right. Why are there 2 record rooms? These little areas, I get concerned that any little reason for a fiscal hawk not to vote yes on this or make an argument against. A supervisory spare office, I'm not even sure why there are any spare offices. Having 5 conference rooms. It's stuff like that. Are these areas that can be looked at further to try and reduce? Because I get concerned that because this is a necessity. We need this school, right? Or we need this building. And I get concerned that we risk losing what we need to try and gain what might be nice to have.
Yeah, I really, I appreciate that viewpoint, and we've tried to do that. I think what we're trying to balance that point with is that not only do we need this school now, we need this school 50 years from now.
Right.
And we need to have a school that we don't look back on and say, geez, we saved, $1 million back in, 2019. What's the cost of a building now? What does that $1 million get us? To talk to those, supervisory spare offices, we've already had conversations. We're looking at the counseling program in the district because we're really stretched thin around counselors. If we add any positions in that realm and we don't plan a space, then all of a sudden now you're renovating a building that you just opened because you don't have sufficient office space. It's also an opportunity for administrators to spend more time on the actual floor of their school than necessarily down on the first floor, but yet you need some of that space. I would say in any school, based on someone's perspective, there's probably 150 square feet that doesn't feel necessary to someone. And I appreciate that. I think when we went back and forth with the principals, we ended up putting kind of the best proposal we could come forward with to the building committee.
Right. What is your sense with Boxborough voting on this to approve?
I don't know if Mary wants to talk to that. Mary's a Boxborough resident, if that's okay.
It is hard to know because we haven't taken any polls, but Peter and I and members of the building committee have been at Pfeiffer's Day and this past Saturday at the Harvest Fair. The people who have come to talk there, there's a smattering of folks who say they're not going to vote for it, the costs, but there's a lot of positive support for it. So, we are hoping that community groups in both Acton and Boxborough will advocate for the project because we can't take that role on. But I am an optimist. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think we can get there.
Do you know what percentage of Boxborough residents go to elementary schools that are physically in Acton?
I don't know it as a percentage. As a number, it's around 40.
Okay.
It's about 50 Acton kids who come into Boxborough and about 40 Boxborough kids who come into Acton. I think we did make a decision that the preschool, so right now there's 6 preschool classrooms in the old Merriam building in Acton and 2 in Boxborough. Because of space limitations at Blanchard, we made a decision that all of the preschool will be in this building. It'll free up 2 rooms there. So that will bring Boxborough residents who want to be in the preschool into the facility. I think it's going to be attractive as a brand new facility. West Acton, it's 2-mile walk from my house to West Acton. So I think it's going to be attractive. Younger parents may be interested. I don't know for sure.
Okay, and then my last question is there a contingency plan if this isn't approved?
So, essentially the timing of the vote, we have from the October 30th board meeting, assuming we are approved by MSBA, we'll have 120 days to secure the funding for that. We've planned the first vote with such time that we could potentially go out a second time if we needed to. After that, you have to make a case with MSBA as to why you think you can get funding, but they also reserve the right to pull your grant at that point. And then you start over in the pipeline with all of the other districts looking for funding. So essentially at that point, the town is on its own to figure out a building.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Christy?
Back when this was first presented to me, the ballpark numbers were that it was going to effectively cost $120 million to fix Douglas and update Gates. Were there renovations that needed to happen there?
Okay.
I would recommend finding out what those numbers are and actually including the Gates part in this too, because we're getting that whole renovation is no longer necessary. It's thrown into this project.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter.
Sure.
Just one question that I have. So, new building will be built, and then kids, teachers, everything will be moved into the new building, and then the old buildings would be taken down.
Correct.
then what happens at that point with parking, et cetera, and bus drop-off and all that with the kids?
During the time while the parking lots are being constructed. So that's a phasing plan that actually will be further worked out as soon as we hire our construction manager and we're approved for the funding, if that takes place in the town, then we begin that process of really honing that. But essentially, busing will have the opportunity to come in and out, and we'll be likely looking at drop-off locations for parents if they need to drop off while we're constructing those two lots. It will be very tight.
The other question I have is the heating system.
Yep.
The proposed heating system, which is the geothermal. I would assume that has less maintenance than having straight boilers.
It does. There's less annual maintenance on a geothermal than on boilers.
So that would be a cost savings as well, plus the efficiency of it.
Correct. And those, I can actually send you that document. The reason I didn't include it in this is the life cycle cost analysis was probably 4 iterations old now from earlier in the building committee's work. And some of the capital numbers in that weren't accurate anymore based on the new cost estimators work. So I didn't want to start putting out numbers that were contradictory because they were old.
When you have an updated one, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, the life cycle cost analysis I'll send you. I'll just say, ignore the capital numbers for now.
Okay.
Sure.
Any further questions from anybody?
It's a little hard to see in the picture where you have the overhead view. It looks like it's maintaining there are 2 ways into the gates lot. There's one down, I think, Maple, and then there's another side road.
Correct.
That comes in. It's maintaining both of those?
Yep, so I can show you on this is the closest thing to a map that I have. This is Spruce Street right here, and then Arlington Street is along this entrance. The buses will turn in from Arlington. They'll come in the front of the building, turn around in the bus loop, and then exit on Arlington. And then separately from that is vehicular traffic, which comes in for faculty and staff parking here. There's also some parent drop-off here, and then they turn around and go right back out on Spruce. So it's designed to keep the two types of traffic separate to reduce the confusion.
What kind of traffic studies have there been in that area?
There have been preliminary traffic studies by a traffic consultant.
I'm just thinking of Charter Road and dealing with the twin school there. The traffic is pretty hideous at drop-off, at pickup time in general. So trying to imagine all of that happening on Spruce is a little interesting.
We're also we're rebuilding the boardwalk here. The distance from this lot to the building is the same as the distance from the Miriam parking lot to the Miriam school. So it's actually the same distance as a parking lot. It feels a little longer because it's through some beautiful wetlands that you could walk every day.
Tell them all about
not that that's a pitch.
Tell them all about the covered bridge.
Yeah, but we're actually widening the boardwalk here, so it's plowable. And we are also planning to cover that so it can be used in all weather.
Thank you.
Sure.
With the one-phase project, is it similar to Minuteman in that there will be a day at the start of the school year when everybody moves into the school at the same time?
Yes. Yeah, we'll certainly have time for teachers to come in and unpack.
Sure.
But then, certainly there's a lot of time in between now and opening day. But we would certainly have, students in, it's kind of a soft opening at the beginning of school, but then we would certainly do a grand opening of some kind.
Okay, but it wouldn't be a phased move-in of different school pieces, correct?
No, that would have happened in a multi-phase project. But this was construct the whole building, move in, and then demolish.
Any further questions? Thank you, Peter.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Appreciate it.
Have a good night.
You too. That brings us to our last appointment for this evening. An update on the North Acton Fire Station from our fire chief and the town manager.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
John's going to kick off the presentation, and we're here to support him. But while we're putting it up, wanted to thank you for having us. Questions? I'll wrap it up.
No, I was seeing something on the TV the other night, actually in Disney on vacation, and there was this show on, and they had a company in Las Vegas that rebuilds fire trucks. mean, they tear them all apart and just rebuild the whole thing, so.
That's cool.
Something to kind of keep in mind. I don't know how feasible it is around here because we have salt that tends to rot everything out, but they do it more fire trucks that are out west that don't have the rot issues that we have, where they replace pumps and transmissions and engines and rebuild everything. It was pretty interesting for communities that operate on a tight budget like we do, that's an option out there maybe.
Roland, didn't Bob Craig rebuild a couple of 1920 vintage engines a few years ago?
Yeah, who did?
I think he did.
Well, we do have two 1936
Yeah.
antique pieces that we do.
I think if my house was
work on.
burning down, I'd want a new apparatus to be there putting it out there in 1936.
They're beautiful antiques, yes.
I think you got a
Still on the
CPC
road.
grant to do some of the work, actually. Might have been before your time.
You know, they were finishing up when I first got on CPC at that time. Suppose there's still some items that need to be taken care of on that, but. And there is the How and How out of Maine that builds four-wheel drive fire trucks.
You've told me, yes.
Take a look at those. The police cruisers are four-wheel drive. We should use them in our fire trucks.
Not yet.
Or we can.
They have them, but we don't. So,
Might not be bad to have one in the future where,
yeah.
during, I'm thinking a major snowstorm when they still had school last year and the buses having a hard time getting up my street because of the hill. Huh? Yeah, I mean, that's an issue with anything winter around here. There we go.
Okay, thanks for the intermission. We're finalizing a couple things, but thank you for inviting us back to talk to you about the North Acton Fire Station project. A few weeks ago at your last meeting, I did provide an update on the design process and some of the work that we've done to get to this point. And we have our design team here tonight to go into a little more detail on that. We also have some cost information that we'd like to go over with you. While we're setting things up, I just wanted to call your attention to our webpage, which is continually updating. We have a frequently asked questions there posted. We have all the information that the design team is working on. We publish here, and it's hard to see on the screen, but there's on the thing on the right, the bottom right, you can submit comments, and they go directly to the design team. So if you have any ideas or suggestions, for those of you following at home. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, you're not only on ActonTV, but you're on YouTube Live tonight.
Excellent.
So out to the whole wide world. And why don't I take a moment to introduce the members of the design team. Of course, you know Chief Hart, Jackie Rudd from Castle Booth, Brian D. Philippus from PMA, who's our owner's project manager, Todd Costa, who is also from Castle Booth, part of the design team. So last time I spoke, I mentioned that we are in the schematic design phase, sort of in a similar stage as the schools. We've completed a schematic design that identifies the floor plan, the sort of general look of the elevations, and then we sent it to the cost estimators. We had 2 independent cost estimates, and they came back and we did a reconciliation to identify what the owner's project managers, estimators thought the costs were and what the designers thought the costs were. And we have that information to present to you tonight. And before I introduce Castle Booze, I'm just going to have the fire chief give a brief update operationally. There have been some questions about the staffing, and I just wanted to clarify, have the chief clarify for what the initial plan for staffing of this 4th station will be.
So over the past few years, I've been kind of talking about adding additional staff to help the workload for our department, and John and I are working on plans for that, but kind of outside of that plan, currently we operate 3 stations with a 10-person staffing model. Our first person out via sick time or vacation or whatever, we don't cover, so we run down to 9 people. So that includes a shift commander who operates out of an Expedition or a Tahoe, and 8 firefighters. So 2 firefighters are on each piece of apparatus as it rolls out the door. So using that model with 4 stations, we can put 2 people in each station and operate North Station very similar to the way we operate our current West Acton Station and South Acton Station. So it's not perfect, but it gives us coverage everywhere that we're looking for, helps to reduce response time in that area, and gets assets to that particular emergency in North Acton. So it's just a quick overview of staffing.
Thank you. And we look forward to questions on all things like that. After this brief presentation, Todd.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for having us. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our company, Castle Booth Associates. It's been doing public safety since the early 60s. Obviously, I wasn't around at that point in time, but from there, I'm basically going to hand over to Jackie to go through the design of our plans and how we've arranged all the spaces and things of that nature, and I'll be back to talk about the money.
Good evening, how are you guys? So this is our site plan. We're located at 66 Harris Street in North Acton. So here you can see we have our new station. It's about 12,300 square feet as a footprint. It's about 13,800 square feet total, including our mezzanines. So in the back here we have our staff parking for the staff firemen, and we have an existing 3-car garage structure on site that we are keeping. And you'll see here in the back we have established wetlands as part of the site, so that's kind of driving some of the site complexities for the project. So here you can kind of see where we're sort of proposing some evergreen hedges that will line this side of the street because we have a brand new house right next door, so we want to be very respectful to the neighbors. We're proposing a couple of nice trees in the back, and dealing with the wetlands, we also have a retaining wall that will be this kind of stone gabion wall type of structure. In the back for the firemen, we also have a patio that will be this concrete pavers, also being very sensitive to the wetlands in close proximity, and featuring some restoration seed mix. Here's the overall first floor plan of the fire station. So you see we have a 3-bay, 1-story building. We have 2 bays that are drive-through, and the further one will house their ladder truck, which will not be a drive-through. Along this left side of the building is all support spaces that are directly off of the apparatus bay. So you'll see we have a lot of storage space for them. We also have a workshop, EMS storage, and their SCBA mask filling stations. We have a state-of-the-art decon laundry in the back for washing all their gear if they come back from a scene. Here they will have all of their gear laundry. And so the front of sort of the main living quarters of the station is your more operational areas. You'll have a conference room here, their watch room where they'll have sort of all their operations that they can keep an eye on with all their calls and things like that. They'll have all their bunk spaces along here, their kitchen and living room along the back, and a fitness space in the middle. So what you don't see as far as the floor plan is up above, this support space will be a storage mezzanine, and then there'll also be a HVAC mechanical mezzanine above this middle area. This is the proposed design of the exterior of the building, which we've presented to the building committee in multiple different options and elevation studies. And we also presented this to the design review board, and they were in favor of this design. So this is our preferred option that we're going through. And that's another view from the other side of the street.
So thank you. And basically to talk about schedule, where we are right now is obviously where the wonderful star is. We're here presenting to you about our budget findings, and continued until the town meeting on the 10th. We're going to be doing and supporting the town manager and the rest of the committee with public outreach and educating the community as to what's involved in this building and why the need for this building, obviously. And then obviously on to the town meeting vote. Excuse me. So once we hit the schematic design, end of schematic design phase, we issue this out to all the drawings out to a professional cost estimator. That's all she does for us. The construction, or the hard construction cost, is the 8.3, roughly 8.4 for round figure, dollar number, with including in that, we like to present this as a total project. So we look at the soft costs, which is your equipment and your owner indirect costs, and that's at the 1.99. And then we also like to carry contingencies, both construction contingencies as well as equipping contingencies and owner indirect contingencies, and that's the 519. For a total project budget at this point of 10,915,550. What's driving that number is this size building is basically the industry is booming. We're losing contractors daily to the Boston market, to the level of we've actually even had them kind of sleeping outside of the construction sites and pulling away from some of the sites that we currently have. The environmental considerations, potential net zero or net zero, the ability for it to become a net zero project. The geothermal heat pump system is driving the cost up. Again, to do a no natural gas building, all the electric service, low E glazing, and a durable exterior finish. We want a lifelong building here that the department can continue to maintain and work, and the town can continue to maintain and work through life. There are also a few complexities. Jackie had alluded to the patio area being pavers. That's allowing us to decrease our lot coverage so that we have less requirement to store water under the paved areas for our impervious areas. So things like that are actually some of the challenges that we're having to overcome relative to the site, relative to the amount of coverage that we have of the site and the building construction market. Construction cost relative to basically going back to the MEP system. We did a life cycle analysis on this. This analysis here is purely to show the difference between the costs of the different mechanical systems. It doesn't reflect into the whole building, but what you can see here is a very rapid, or much more rapid turnaround on your investment with the geothermal. And the CO2 emissions are down considerably from the baseline of a central VAV system. So we're really trying to push that envelope to make sure that we're being hyper energy efficient on the building construction, but also on the building operation. One thing to be noted with this is not only are we using the geothermal to heat and cool the space within the building, the living quarters, we're also using it to heat the apparatus-based slab, which actually helps to dry out the equipment faster. And we're also using it to heat the hot water. And in part of that, we actually, in the cooling months for the summertime, they actually have the ability to pull the heat from the building itself that's generated from within the building and put that into your hot water. So it's lots of opportunity for energy efficiency and not running the pumps that are going into the ground. As well as we do have, similar to what was mentioned for the school, we do have an electric boiler to offset those colder winter months and try and help keep our quantity of wells for the geothermal system down. Obviously, the pros of this, it is the most energy efficient. There's no natural gas required on the site. The lower carbon footprint system provides both heating and cooling. As I mentioned too, we're also, mentioned as a side note, we're also taking advantage of heat within the space. And electricity is most compatible with a solar PV array. One thing to note was that the two very large semi-flat roofs, we call them low slope, for the apparatus bay and for the central area of the living quarters are set up in such a manner that PV arrays can be put on top of them to offset that energy cost, and we're striving for that to be a zero, a net zero project. The next step down, which is a variable heat pump, that's a air system. They're more efficient than the general, VAV boiler system, but they tend to have a little, as you get closer and closer to 0 degree days, they become less and less efficient. So then you need to bring in a boiler for something like the radiant floor within the apparatus bay and things of that nature. And that brings in, obviously, carbon footprint in natural gas. The downside to the geothermal system, it's the highest initial cost, unfortunately. But because of that, life cycle and operational cost efficiency, you're getting the quickest return on investment there. And then for the variable heat pump system, that your condensers are exposed to the weather, their life isn't going to be as long. All of the geothermal heat pump is really exact same as the variable refrigerant. You're just using groundwater to do that heat exchange rather than an alternative refrigerant. So our initial cost estimates when they came in were considerably higher than what we're presenting to you here tonight. The effort the group has already made was to reduce that value to present you the most cost-effective one building possible. We've already looked at taking some of the materials and kind of downgrading them a little bit for a less expensive material. Still something that's going to give you a full, life of building, but instead of doing brick everywhere, we'll look at using metal panel. And this was actually recommended to us by the design review board as well. So that will help to offset some of that cost. That's already reflected in the value that we're sharing. Reduce some of the area of the floor plan. We're trying to, again, kind of suck a little bit of area out of the building. There's a pro and a con to that. Obviously, the building becomes a little bit more efficient. You have less area. But unless you're taking space out, it's not quite as efficient as dropping that cost. You're actually kind of raising your cost per square foot because you're just making a smaller building. You still need the same number of pieces and parts. An overall paving reduction, trying again, get that initial, not reduction, but to have the owner contract. So the town's contract for paving would be utilized to pave the site. It kind of takes the money from here and puts it over there, but what you're not doing is you're not paying a general contractor markup on that. So there's cost savings within that. Another idea that we've often explored, and this is kind of a community relation thing as well, is to have the plantings done by the owner. We've seen a lot of communities actually go to the local vocational school. If you supply them the materials, they kind of supply the labor, and you can utilize your relationship with Minuteman, or we've even seen the state sheriff's department come in and do the install. Again, on a no cost for the labor, all you're doing is buying the material for install. And then remove the geothermal system, but there is a higher impact in that. That's kind of a last resort that we want to kind of go to with that. Alternates, so some things, a bid alternate is another way to kind of reap the benefit and try and gain some savings. So these are some things that the department has identified as areas where we can save some costs if the bids come in as we're kind of predicting. The volatility of the market is a little unknown at the current time, but if we identify alternates, this can kind of help us maintain, again, come within budget. So to change the front doors of the building from a bifold door for the apparatus, to an overhead sectional door, change the metal panel that was described up here as a value engineering over to a fiber cement siding, or hardy plank is the more general term typically used. It's a little bit more cost effective for install, a little bit cheaper, less expensive product. So that's a value engineering item. And then also to remove the refinishing of the pole barn, the 3-bay pole barn on the back side of the site. So that would have to be curbed and then dealt with at a later point in time. Okay, thank you.
First off, we just heard the school presentation, and I'm looking at the numbers. Right now you're saying about 8.3 million for 13,800 square feet. The schools come under about 500 something per square feet, and you guys are coming at 600.5, whatever my calculation. So why is the cost more for the construction?
Sure, I figured that question would be coming, thank you. So to that point, your classrooms are 1,000, give or take, square feet. It's been a while since I've done a school. You have a much more condensed footprint with this building, so you don't gain efficiencies in scale. More square footage to spread that price on a school than on a 1,300 square foot fire station. Your generator, you can only get so small with it until you can't get any smaller. You're stuck buying something of that size in nature. Same thing with your mechanical systems. It's just a pure, simple fact of efficiency and scale. And then you're also really packing in a lot of technology, safety features for the modern firefighter, decontamination and sensitivity to environments. We have to be ultra aware of it. It's become more and more prevalent since 9/11 that when a firefighter returns from a call, his gear that he wore on that call, even after they wash it, continues to off-gas. It continues to put the carcinogens in the air. So one thing I don't know if you happen to notice, Jackie kind of pointed out in the floor plan that there is a room for their turnout gear. Well, that room is actually sealed with a pair of, lack of a better term, restaurant doors, dual acting doors. The reason for that is it's under negative pressure. That system has to be separated and isolated from any other area. So there's kind of a dedicated mechanical just for that one room so that it exhausts, but yet it still conditions the air, removes the moisture to preserve the equipment and keep the life of the equipment that the firefighter needs for protection for as long as possible. Again, it's an opportunity for us to incorporate something into the building that's not only going to protect the firefighter, but it's going to protect the town's investment in that PPE is what we call it, for the life of the suit. That also goes in turn into this decontamination room in the back where there's some specialty washing equipment, drying equipment within that area that's much more expensive. Again, smaller footprint. It's harder to spread that cost across.
Steve?
First comment, Chief, we should have bought it a couple of years ago when we all thought it would cost $7 million. So, and John, you may know about this one. The Westford Fire Station on Boston Road, it's relatively new. I think it's quite a bit bigger, 23,000 square feet. And the last time I looked at anything, it looked like it cost about $16 million. This one seems to be, proportionately much more expensive. Is it simply the cost of inflation? So the Westford one's got to be a year, maybe too old.
Yeah, I think they opened the doors, so to speak, more than a year and a half ago, and they probably went out to bid probably 16 months before that. So it was probably 3 years ago that their pricing was from, and I think there's been significant escalation in the last 3 years.
Yeah, it was initially estimated at 13 and wound up at 16, if what I read in the local press is true. And the other question I had is, when the consultants did their study of the town response systems, the ladder truck was going to be in the center station. Obviously, the center station would have taken some rehab to do that. And I'm surprised to see it's in the North Acton Station now, because I thought the consultants were fairly clear that the ladder truck had to be in a position to respond anywhere in town, and the center station would be the best place for it. Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, that's a good one for you.
So the simple answer to that, Steve, is that ladder truck only fits in Station 2 South Acton currently. It does not fit in the center station. So the consultant's plan was to build North Acton Station and then ultimately remodel Station 1. In that time, we would relocate the ladder to there. It just doesn't fit in there.
Are we still thinking of doing that, or is it now going to be the permanent home of the ladder truck?
Well, we still have to get through building the North Station, and then we'll reconsider what we need to do with the center. All existing stations are very old. The newest one we have was built in 1961. They don't really fit our needs. They don't fit our equipment. They don't have any of the modern facilities. So it's going to be a long-term capital project that we need to dive into.
How much of the design costs that were initially approved have been used on this so far?
The exact amount I don't have in front of me, but the appropriation was for $750, and we have most of that left. I think when we look at total project costs, we're including that money, that $750. So technically, some of what we're talking about today has already been funded.
And what is the expected life of this new building? Is it like schools where you assume 50 years? So I presume it has a lot of bunk rooms there.
Yes.
Based on the number of firefighters we currently have, ignoring the hope for expansion, that's a lot of bunk rooms. Is the idea that will be the number we'll need to go?
So it's being designed to support the needs of the department as they may evolve over the next 50 years, which it may involve increasing staffing generally, or it may involve increasing staffing at this location. So we want to make sure that the station, since it's going to be our modern station that we hope to use and hope the other ones will someday be more like this, we want to make sure that this one has established in a way that will support the operational needs going forward. We would not need on day one to use the spaces that are here, but it'd be a lot more expensive to build down the road.
And I understand there's fixed costs in any building. My understanding is that a lot of that is foundation and roof. Why are we looking at a one-story building and not a two?
So, to that effect, we analyzed a two-story building as an option. It actually came up, when you put in a two-story building, you have to build in 2 stairs and an elevator to go two-story. So by doing that, you're actually increasing some of that initial cost for the investment of an elevator. 2-stop elevator is easily $100,000. And then you're also increasing a operational maintenance contract that the town would have to continue in order to maintain and keep the elevator operational.
And, but that doesn't help with the offset from the wetlands at all?
No, it didn't. It's just a very tight site.
How much of the expense comes from being on the wetlands? What would we save on a different site?
Each site has its own challenges, so it's hard to answer that question because the
Okay.
other site could have something worse.
This started out as a $7.5 million project when it was first presented to us asking for design funds. And now we're looking at 11, which I can only assume will go up because my father's in construction. Projects don't tend to come in under bid with the exception of Minuteman.
Well, we've worked hard to include a number of contingencies. There's a 20% design contingency. There's a 5% additional contingency. We think that if that station was built when this project was first envisioned, it probably would have cost closer to the range of 7.5, but we're here now and we're trying to get it built now so that we're not talking about this in 3 years and wishing we can do it for 10.9.
I assume it's the Board of Selectmen who want it now. Part of what I'm wondering is, as a taxpayer, I'm being asked to foot a really big bill coming up for the school, which we need, absolutely need to do right now. We're paying the money either way, and we're getting more of it paid for by the MSBA. The same with Minuteman. We owe that money either way. So when I'm looking at what could be cut back, I'm wondering in part with this fire station that has gotten more expensive because of just the conditions of where we are, whether we're not better off waiting a few years and hopefully having a better construction environment, especially if we have a slowdown. Construction costs tend to decrease.
I don't know that we're able to predict that just doing this at a later time would cause the project to be less expensive. I find that to be unlikely.
I'm wondering why we're doing it now.
For the last, I've been here for 1.5 years, and for the 30 years before that, there's been people in the political realm and otherwise that have been asking for better coverage in North Acton. And right now, we are providing public safety to the community, but the response times to people and businesses that live in North Acton is longer than we'd like them to be. And they do a great job of getting there. But we think it's in the best interest of the community to provide public safety by providing better coverage, by having people positioned there so they can get there quicker. And it's been a goal of the town for at least the last 3 years after the design funding was approved to have it at this site. And we've been moving along a design process.
Have other sites been considered?
Yes.
I understand that it needs to be in North Acton. I fully agree with needing improved response time there. But this is really a lot more money than it was initially projected at being. And at a time when we're asking people for a bunch more money, I'd love to know some way.
And it's also the timing of what you've, of these increases. Less than 2 years ago, this was a $7.5 million project. In early August, this was a $9.5 million project. Today, it's an $11 million project. The escalating speeds of this is, I think, part of what is sitting so poorly in this meeting this evening. As early as August, we were still being told 9.5, and now we're looking at 11.
I was very strongly trying to ask you to wait for me to get the schematic design completed before you asked me to repeat the cost estimate in August, but I understand your point. I think that until we've completed this design process, we didn't know the cost of the fire station. When that budget appropriation for $750,000 was 2 years ago, that wasn't the level of design that we have now. So
Fine, but that's a 50% change in 2 years.
I think that sounds right, but I think
I think what we're saying is that doesn't sound right, sir.
Well, we're here to discuss the fire station that's been proposed. That was a goal of the selectmen, and that we think is well-designed to meet the needs of the community for the next 50 years. We've looked at the potential for bringing it to the special town meeting in December, the cost over 30 years for a project of this size for a single-family tax bill is $62 to $68, or thereabouts, and we're going to continue to work to identify ways through the value engineering exercises that we started to refine the number better as we get closer. But at the point that we are now, with the schematic design completed and the cost reconciliation performed, we're now moving along with this as a number that we're going to try to continue to chip away at.
You originally had 3 designs you were considering. Were there any potential cost savings in any of the other designs that you had on the table? Is there a specific reason, a specific value add that landed you on this 3rd design?
No, I think that you're talking about the elevation looks. All the floor plans were generally the same. It was just different ways for it to look from the outside, and I think there are material costs that may be different based on the design layout. Could we quantify those?
It's difficult to quantify at this stage, but the material options that we listed are only going to decrease that initial hard construction cost. There's still, excuse me, as part of what we are sharing is a conservative estimate based on where we are schematic design. There is a design contingency that some of that value will disappear, some of that value will get sucked into the building for some of the items that are not shown at this current stage, and then there's escalation. Right now, our experience for these size buildings is we're anywhere between 5 to 5.5% annually that we're seeing this type of building. That's to answer your question about why the exponential growth. We're seeing a very high, yes, there is a predicted flattening or, predicted is the wrong term. There is an anticipated flattening or possibly decline, but nobody is able to quantify or predict when that is going to take place. This could continue for as long as Boston's.
Yeah, the number we're being told on the school side is 3% labor cost inflation per year, not 5.
I understand that, but that's our estimator. This is all that she does for us, and she does it based on geographical location within the state, and that's where she's landed us.
Steve?
Well, to Christie's question, the site, Harris Street, we did own anyway. So moving to another site would probably not be less expensive unless we found another one we own. However, it was picked pretty much as an ideal site by the consultant that we had do the response time study a few years ago. So I think the site's where it's going to be. The question of do it now, should have done it a couple years ago, obviously. If you live in North Acton, you're at a significantly higher risk to have your property damaged or to die because the response times are twice what they are in other parts of Acton. And that I don't find acceptable as a resident of North Acton. However, I do have a question. Has the sustainability or the net zero driven the cost up from the last time by a significant amount?
There's definitely an incremental cost for saying we don't want to do gas and then we want to do the geothermal, 100,000 to 300,000, depending on how the final things work out with the rebates and other things like that.
I mean,
is that for the install cost? Yeah, not counting for the life cycle cost, but the cost of construction, which is what we're talking about today.
I guess everybody's in favor of sustainability. Everybody's in favor of saving energy. Yet I wonder, since we have a townwide electricity aggregation program, how many people opt to pay the extra penny to go green? I mean, that's a pretty hard survey of all residents as to whether they'll pay for green energy or not. Do we know the percentage?
No, I don't know the percentage, no. But we just introduced a different component to that program, and it's actually starting this month. Thank you for the plug. Acton Power Choice. Look for it in your mailbox.
It's a good deal, yes.
It's a good rate. You also have the ability to opt up to 100% green energy for a pretty good rate as well.
Well, could somebody find me the percent, last year's percentage even of how many of our residents opted to pay extra for the green energy?
Sure, I can get that for you.
Yeah, a couple of questions, please. I forget the timeline already, but by the time we're at town meeting, will we have a firm budget? Right now, it's still...
Yes.
And will that contract be fixed price or
Oh, no,
guaranteed
sorry,
maximum?
no, sorry. I thought, we will not have it out to bid. No, it will not be out to bid before town meeting. We're going to wait until afterwards.
And will we go for either a fixed price or a guaranteed maximum price contract, or would we be subject to further escalation?
We typically would bid it as a total project cost.
Okay, GMP.
So that's a design bid build, not a construction manager at risk.
Right.
You're planning on doing CM at risk. You're planning on doing design bid build.
Yes.
And then secondly, I know we're talking now about the North Acton Fire Station, but, you know, the chief mentioned the other three and the need to do something with them over time. I guess I'm curious what the timeline might be for those three, and will those buildings be renovated, or will they need to be demolished and rebuilt as something similar to what we're seeing today, or do we know?
I think that's something that we'll be, you know, we started working on. We did a facility study in the last few years that gave us general sense of what it would cost to make improvements to them. But I think it's also a larger discussion on whether there's benefits to looking at changing the way those structures are. So I think that's something we'll work on for the next 10 years. But I think what key thing is missing is sort of the anchor in the north. I think once we have the anchor in the north, we can sort of determine the best way to work on the rest of the stations.
Thank you. My first question is, are there any grants or anything outside funding that we have applied for but been denied, or if we had some alterations or something like that we would qualify for that we know of?
No, there isn't a program as great as the MSBA for
Right.
fire stations.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, there are certain things with building new construction and the energy efficiency. You can apply for rebates through the utility, but those aren't as significant as some of the other grants we've been talking about today.
Okay. And then when a project like this is priced out labor-wise, obviously they're focusing on the town that we're in, maybe our proximity to Boston, where construction costs are significantly higher. When we put something like this out for the bid, to actually do the work, how far-reaching do we go? Because, look, when I hire someone to paint, no offense to Acton painters, but when I hire someone to paint, I hire someone from Lowell or Bill Ricca, because I get much nicer pricing for the exact same quality of work. So how far-reaching do we go? Do we go to Lawrence? Do we go further out west? Because out there, the construction costs are not anything like Boston, or are we just trying to get Lexington pricing?
No, so we're basing the estimates on proximity. We don't know exactly how far-reaching. I can tell you from pure experience, I'm working with a contractor right now who wants to bid our work, and he'll come from Rhode Island to bid your work, to bid this job. We just finished, I'm gonna get the name wrong, Hudson, which pulled from New Hampshire. New Hampshire is not as busy, so you will gain that benefit. We're giving you a prediction based on proximity, but we can't predict who's busy, who's hungry, and who's not at this point. We're going to strive to put this out to bid, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, spring, early summer, which the drive in that is you're catching a contractor who's potentially, looking to keep his guys busy for the next 12 months. So they're going to be a little bit hungrier in the early part of the year as opposed to the end of the year. And they're also going to be hungrier to get in and get on that job to try and get it weather tight so that he can keep his guys working through the winter. So we're kind of giving you, the estimates are usually done on the middle of the road. We're not trying to strive for the lowest number.
Sure.
But we try and give you kind of a middle of the road and hope for the best. Now, to that effect, the numbers that we're sharing, our company in the 20-some odd years that I've been working for them has, I can't say never, but we do not miss that mark. We have contingencies in there to make sure that the community is protected, and our ultimate goal is to hand money back at the end of the job to make sure that it's not all spent.
How many parties do we go out to, or is there just a mechanism where?
Open bid.
Okay.
At this dollar value, you do not have to pre-qualify the contractors. Pre-qualification sometimes limits the amount of competitiveness, but we do vet all of the contractors to make sure that you're getting a responsible contractor. You don't want, Jimmy's Electric coming in, who's been in business for 2 years and is going to crush under pressure when it comes to meeting the demands of this project. No offense to anybody who might be Jimmy's Electric. We'd make sure that everything's fully vetted, that you're getting responsible contractors that have been DCAM qualified. They're going to stand there and they're going to get the job done. And if they don't, we've got a bond over them. But we also maintain supervision the entire project. Jackie will be out here on a bi-weekly or weekly basis as needed to make sure that they're following through with the contract requirements.
Thank you.
Thank you. I realize I'm mixing apples and oranges here when comparing a fire station to a school. But that said, the methodology of looking at design bid build versus construction manager at risk was something we spent quite a bit of time on the school building side. And it was made clear to us that design bid build carries with it an inherent greater risks than doing a construction manager at risk. And that the DBB method is great if you can get advantageous labor costs, but is not something you want to do at the tail end of the longest expansion in American history. That while I don't think any of us think we can time any market, and I don't think any of us think that a town can be nimble enough to strike right when the timing is correct, is it not the case that by avoiding, or would the cost estimates for this have come in differently with a construction manager at risk approach versus a design bid build? And are you quite confident that DBB is going to be the most cost-effective way of getting this project done? You're not going to be able to do any of the site planning. You're not going to be able to do any of the pre-purchasing that goes through with construction manager risk. So I'm definitely asking for more detail as to the decision to go DBB instead of CM at risk. And why do you think that now is the right time to do DBB when looking at labor costs that are at recent highs?
Sure. You want me?
Sure.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure. So good question and excellent research. However, this size project, and again, an apple to an orange, comparing this to a school. The other thing about our company is we specialize in public safety and schoolwork, so we're familiar with both sides of things. MSBA really pushes for the DBB, the CM at risk.
They only started accepting it 3 or 4 years ago.
Right, but since it's been available, and it's only been available for a handful, about 3 or 4 years, I believe, it has been something that they really strive for. it gets that team member on as part of the design phase. In a good process they're in as part of the CM, part of the schematic design phase. However, this size project is not going to pull that level of contractor. You're going to get a general contractor who's trying to play a CM role, and he's not going to be as forthcoming and as used to that role. There is also about I believe it's a 10% premium to have them because they're, as a CM at risk process, because they're in so much earlier, they're making decisions relative to phasing. They're a CM, and trust me, we do public safety as CM at risk. We have one going on right now in Beverly. That there is a point in time with a complex schedule or a rapid schedule or a complex phasing project where a CM at risk is 100% the way to go. It avoids the potential for change orders relative to delay claims or any unforeseen conditions. They're part of the design process. They're owning the budget real early. This is a relatively simple project from that approach, and you're going to get a lot more competitive bids by doing it a design bid build process.
Follow up, if I may. Is there, to that end, is there anything that precludes us from taking the design work, taking the schematics, and putting them on the shelf until there's a more favorable labor condition?
The only thing that would do that is continued, in my opinion, continued escalation. Nobody's going to be able to predict when that's going to stop. And then we actually had another community that we were working with who did just that. They tabled it. When they finally brought it up, the building code changed. They went over the original budget, even with the escalated value. We had to bid it multiple times.
So this is not a question about the finance part of it. Being a North Acton resident, and I travel on Harris Street quite a bit, I'm sure the feasibility studies have been done. I've been told that it's been done, but I still get questions from many residents up in North Acton that there are blind spots on both ends of the road, and how is traffic going to be managed with the fire trucks coming in and out. I know there might be an answer. This is a question to the chief, but do you have any examples of other New England towns with a windy street where there is a fire station located so it's easier to understand?
I don't have specific examples other than we operate in our own town with lots of windy, narrow intersections. Relatively speaking, we are able to navigate these intersections and narrow roads. We know we do have the advantage when we are responding to an emergency call to have the lights and sirens, which helps us manage traffic. That doesn't speak to when we're not going to an emergency, but we're very conscientious of going with the flow of traffic and, you know, being safe drivers. So the reality of it is we live and operate in narrow, windy roads, so we're kind of used to that. I really can't speak to the actual intersection. We do have consultants studying that, and hopefully will give us recommendations to how to best mitigate that.
Yeah, just one quick question. You had mentioned that this job is almost too small to get a large contractor in. So I guess my question is there a benefit? Let's say these both pass, the school and the fire station. Is there a benefit to putting this out for bid as a package? We're going to be putting out for bid a large contract. Is there any benefit or economies of scale or anything with one?
I think we run into a problem there where it's actually two separate municipalities. That's the building authority. And then I think we'd probably run afoul of the MSBA process because because we'd be splitting our time in personnel across two projects instead of one. So I love that idea.
But it'd be one company, right? So they might have a vested interest to perform in both aspects. I'm just trying to think outside the box a little.
Considering the construction manager at risk selection happening in December of this year for the school side, I don't think we could combine the two of them since there's two separate municipalities.
Right.
My question is, you're talking about metal on the outside versus maybe using the hardy plank. I know the hardy plank does have an R value. Obviously, your metal in the winter is not going to have an R value. It's going to add cold. And in the summer, if the sun's on, it's going to heat up a lot more than the hardy plank would. And the other question I had too was with the doors. You're talking about a bifold door on the front of the building. I don't understand. I don't envision how that works versus a door that goes up like a regular garage door and comes down like a regular door like we have in all our other fire stations. I don't see why you'd go to a totally different type of door.
Do you want to answer that one, Chief? You want me to? Okay. The advantage of a bifold door, one often error that happens with a fire station is the department gets excited as soon as the door is out of line of sight, the guys go. Sometimes they don't wait for the red-green light. Sometimes there's no red-green light. We try and always do that as a safety factor. That inherently with a ladder truck, you got a big element above your head that's out of line of sight, takes out the bottom panel of an overhead sectional door. That becomes a replacement maintenance issue. It's also the size of these doors. They're very heavy. You have to do continued routine maintenance. Motors, gears, wheels have to be greased, so on and so forth. We hadn't experienced the bifold doors. We'd seen them for quite a while. Again, I'd say I've been doing this for 20 years. 4 years ago, we installed the first pair down in Chatham, Massachusetts. The bifold is fully visible until it's open, but the benefit to it is it's open twice as quick as the sectional overhead, eliminating, or I shouldn't say eliminating, reducing the opportunity for it being hit. The reason why I say reducing is Chatham was open for 2 weeks, and they had one individual back the truck into a bifold door. The truck got damaged, not the door. So they're very robust doors. It decreases the maintenance and the operational cost, and it actually helps the firefighters in their response.
What's the cost difference?
They are more expensive.
Like 50% more, or?
I think that's in the ballpark, about 50% more, which is why it's one of the value engineering items.
Anywhere you can engineer out cost is always a good thing.
Yes.
This one. Thank you. One last question.
Thank you. I may have missed it. What percentage of this project is held in contingency? What's the, you're saying 10.9. So what's the potential rosy upside, and what's the realistic potential downside that we're looking at here?
So we recommend on a new construction project carrying 5% construction contingency. That is going to be used for any sort of construction-related element. We also recommend, just as time goes by and equipment changes, equipment contingency basically helps with the purchasing of, furniture, specialty fire equipment. There's, 2% of the equipping costs there, and then there's another 2% for the owner indirect costs, so that if we, for some reason, encounter some sort of anomaly on the site, we've got a coverage there. Ultimately, that 519 wouldn't be touched, but realistically, there's no such thing as much as we strive, there's no such thing as a perfect set of documents. Every building we do, unfortunately, is a prototype. I like to use the analogy of Ford and Chevy can't get it right when they do thousands of vehicles a day. We're doing one a day. We do our best using software and our working knowledge, but there is some level of change that is going to happen through the construction process.
The design contingency of 20%?
based on where we are right now, where the documents are right now. So that design contingency accounts for any information data that we were not able to put into the design documents when they went to the estimator, albeit all of the light fixtures throughout the building, the ceiling tile A as opposed to ceiling tile B, whether or not it has a ceiling, is that 20%, some of it is going to get absorbed into that. Obviously, it's part of the construction cost. Some of it will come out.
Am I oversimplifying it by adding up all of your contingencies and seeing 29% contingency?
It is, yes, that is an oversimplification. There is line items, like I said, the design.
Even 10% is, $1 million.
Right.
Right, so
Well, when you're
that's
looking at
a lot of contingency.
You're looking at the bottom line item, is 10% of that. The 20% is only 20% before it gets to, that 20% is included in the 8.3.
Fair enough. I'm still surprised at the escalations on this in such a short period of time.
Thank you, John.
So thanks again for the opportunity to talk about this project. We are having a public meeting on the 18th, this month, on the 18th, at the Public Safety Facility. There's going to be another meeting here, so we're going to have it in that room, try a different layout. So please come join us there again. Thanks.
All right. Finance Committee business. We have 3 sets of minutes. So why don't we briefly look over those? When everybody is ready, I will accept a motion.
Mr. Chairman, we're voting these individually. Right?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes of July 23rd.
As
Second.
amended.
As amended.
What is the amendment?
Brian spelled his last name wrong.
Whose?
While we're at it, let's put a colon in 823 instead of 8.23 for adjournment under section 7.
What was that? Sorry.
Instead of a period.
Section 7 at 8:23 p.m.
Yep.
All right, as amended.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Abstained? Motion passes. Next is going to be the August 6th meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the August 6th minutes.
Is there any amendments to this? Let me see. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Abstain.
Easy, we're not here. Okay. That brings us to our August 27th meeting minutes. Christie?
I would like my name to be spelled correctly.
Ian, another one.
And I was actually absent for that meeting as well. Brian? I was here in spirit.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes of August 27th as amended.
Do I have a second? Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Abstain.
The minutes, all three pass. Liaison reports. Who would like to start tonight? Christie.
The Kelly's Corner Committee met with the, I don't remember the formal term, the engineers and designers, and reviewed the various aspects of what they're looking at and what the costs are relative to things. There's been discussion about the materials to use for the various stone walls that are required. Apparently the town can get through the state those large granite blocks like we have forming part of the wall next to the library over there. They don't require a footing to be laid underneath them, so those can be used rather inexpensively compared to putting up actual stone walls in some locations. And John can clarify this probably. My understanding is that the total cost of the project does not currently include the pocket park. That is part of the design, but it does not include the construction, and that the town would pay for that at a later date. The pocket park.
On the corner?
Yeah.
I believe, I'm not sure. We'll have to get an answer on that.
Thank you. Christine?
Well, you heard most of what I learned at the last school committee meeting. We did get a staffing report that they hired 49 new educators this year. On top of 54 that were hired last year, it represents a 20% turnover in staff in the last 2 years. It does not seem to be normal. But
They had 49, you said?
we did 49 this year and 54 last year. All of the turnover fits well into the budget in that they're expecting a $75,000 positive variance in the salary budget.
How much positive?
75,000.
Was it predominantly in elementary level, junior high, high school, evenly split across the three?
That was not, I will get you that information.
Okay.
I do have access to that information, but I don't have it at my fingertips. There was a lot of retirement.
Just wondering if there's any reason to be alarmed at the high school level since, we got that Boston magazine putting us at second. That came out just two weekends ago, putting us as the second school in the state. So I was curious if there's any canaries in the coal mine on turnover. So if it's all in the high school, we need to know. If it's split across the whole district, that might be something different, might be assigned something different altogether.
Okay, I'll pull that up.
Tom?
I don't have a report tonight. The CPC meets Thursday. It's a rather full agenda, and I will have a full report at our next meeting.
Al?
So can you let
Can I just add to that? I think we heard one more thing. There was new furniture at the junior high library. All the chairs were new, so we were sitting on some new furniture.
Yeah, they're plastic and colorful.
Yeah, they're plastic and colorful.
I avoided them.
Al?
I was at the Board of Selectmen meeting last night. Just a couple of updates. The town manager update was at the Civil Defense Building that was declared surplus at the last Board of Selectmen meeting will now be put out as available for sale to the public. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to be doing that, but it should be in short order. Also, there's an intermunicipal agreement for a building inspectional services with the town of Littleton. This is similar to the agreement with that we have with Boxborough for veteran services, but this is only expected to be temporary as they just lost staffing and they're temporary filling it. They're going to be using Acton staff not to exceed 15 hours a week, but it should only be a few months is what it's expected to. The big topic that came up was that the dog park committee that was appointed around 2 years ago came back with a report. They are pushing for a dog park in the town of Acton. They went through a bunch of different location sites. The two that were proposed were the DPW land just north of Nara next to Miracle Field and then 70 Quarry Road, which is also near NARA, kind of up the road. Both take pressure off of NARA for dog use. They're not supposed to be off leash there. And that, I don't know if it's a huge problem, but it should take pressure off of NARA. As far as funding goes, there's this foundation called the Stanton Foundation. They're expected to potentially fund a large portion of what this cost could be. They fund up to $250,000 for one park, including design fees. The town needs to provide the land and commit 10% in matching funds for the construction. Those costs won't bring water to the site. So that's where probably most of the cost would end up coming from. The suggestion is to solicit voluntary contribution, voluntary contribution appeal, as well as potentially raising dog license fees up by $2 per year, which should generate about $4,000 a year, which is the expected cost, although that's questionable, the expected cost to maintain. I think it felt like when they came in that there was just going to be, I don't want to say a rubber stamp, but it felt like a done deal when they went in. But there does seem to be some issue with the location sites. As Dean Charter mentioned, the DPW site is not ideal, which is their first choice. It's a critical infrastructure site. So it needs a little more exploration, but this is what's being pushed, so more to come.
Mike?
Yeah, the Economic Development Committee, along with the Middlesex West Chamber of Commerce, will be hosting Acton's first Restaurant Week, September the 16th through the 22nd. Well, most, if not all, restaurants in Acton will be participating, and I think I would encourage all Acton residents, especially there out in their listening audience, to participate. Give it a try. It could be an annual event that's fun for all.
Jason?
So I was uncharacteristically quiet during the whole school building committee. I wanted to give them the chance to speak. The only thing that I would like to add at this point is just a quick calculation of the impact on the single-family tax bill for these projects. From the town, I received a simple spreadsheet which I will send out to everyone so that you can tinker with at your own time and interest. But if we're looking at a $10,150,000 building for the fire station, which is the 10.9 minus the 750 that was used for the feasibility, pick your favorite interest rate, which is where it gets interesting. But 2.75 puts 2.75 interest rate at 30 years puts the fire station $66 a pop. So consistent with what the town manager said with the range, 2.1%, which would be quite nice if we could strike it quickly, puts it down around $61 a year. So that's all well and good. When you want to add in the cost of Acton's share of the school, if you pick I dropped a zero. Hang on. I dropped a zero on that one. If you put in Acton's share of the school and go back to the current assumed rates that are being used by the finance subcommittee of the school building committee, and you take out the fire station, the Acton share of the school building is around 427, and it goes down from there. If you assume a better rate. Bottom line, I think we're looking at it right around, and I will by all means couch all this, and we should have ranges, et cetera, et cetera. But basically, we should be looking around $500 in increase on a single family house value of approximately $590,000 a year. So adjust your numbers accordingly when you.
As long as you're not on the new sewer line.
As long as you're what?
Not on the new sewer line.
That did not come up at all tonight, now did it?
I did a similar calculation using the ALG spreadsheet, and it worked out to the tax bill for next year, using all of the general tax increase and assuming the debt exclusions passed, the overall tax bill increasing by 6.09% or $715. This doesn't have the updated fire station numbers, and this does not include the eventual, this is just the bands on the building. It doesn't have the full bonding for the school twin building, which they have that kick in 2023.
What rate were you using?
I don't have a rate on here. This is just what they put. Brian, what rate is being used?
Without not having it in front of me, Christie, I'm not sure. I couldn't, I'm not sure what's in that spreadsheet, to be honest with you, the ALG. I know I think the full cost of the fire station is in there at $550,000, but I think also Minuteman was pulled out as a debt exclusion as well, so that has to be looked at. So that's with the assumption, I believe, that Minuteman is in there as a debt exclusion. You got North Acton Fire, and you have a ban for the schools, and I'm not sure what that number is off the top of my head. So that we're gonna have to look at that a little more closely.
The 2021 payment for the schools is listed as $423,824, going up to $5,000. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. That is for Minuteman. The schools is that's $266,000 for fiscal year 21, going up to almost $800,000. $266,000. No, I'm done. I'm sorry.
Well, let's talk offline, make sure that we're looking at we're using the same methodology, so that we can have a consistent presentation. And of course, the number one variable that is beyond all of our control is what the interest rate is, and it does have a bearing.
Anybody else? Christine?
I do have Jason's number. So the high school, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 3 of those are a psychologist, a counselor, and a special ed teacher. So I don't think the high school has a problem in turnover.
Al?
Yeah, I move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.